I'm going to go ahead and introduce our speaker today, MC. His name is Ryan. He's the Vice President for Mergers and Acquisitions here in ScalePad. He's a great all-around guy. Be happy to introduce you guys to him. Go ahead, Ryan, take it away. Or do you want to go ahead and share your screen, or do you want me to control the slides?
If you wouldn't mind clicking through, that'd be helpful.
Yeah, I got you.
Cool. All right, and there's only like 6 slides, so it's no big deal. All right, so next one. There you go. So that's me. My name is Ryan Sigouin, VP of Mergers and Acquisitions and ScalePad. So I've been with the company now for going on 7 months. So brought in really when they started to take kind of the acquisition path very seriously. So you guys have obviously been well aware of kind of our activity since January. Mark, you want to hit the next slide? It's a little bit about me. So I spent the last 21 years of my life as a MSP owner. I had a MSP based out of Vancouver. It was called Level 4 Technologies. I merged with an organization called F12, going on about 5 years ago. Over that time, I basically led the integration of over a dozen MSPs. So I bought quite a few organizations myself through Level 4. And then when I moved into F12, their strategy on growth was really heavily acquisition focused. And my job as a COO within that organization was really to help lead the integration strategy, the mergers and acquisition strategy, and try and figure out how to kind of tie all those pieces together. I also worked really closely as the liaison to all of the acquisitions that had been done kind of over a 15-year period. So essentially the shoulder to cry on, if you will, of all of the people that came into both Level 4 and into the F12 realm. F12 grew to about 250 staff in 7 locations, in 3 provinces across Canada, kind of in the time that I was there. And I had the pleasure of recapitalizing that business twice through different PE firms. One was a bank and one was like a pure private equity player. So that's a little bit of my history. So you want to hit the next one, Mark? So in preparation for this, I spent a lot of time kind of going through, and like there's a lot of conversation about M&A within the MSP community now. And what I was really hoping not to do was rehash the same information that everybody talks about in these conversations, like exactly what are the levers and who is buying and all the things that I know you guys already have access to in terms of information. And so I'm going to take a little bit of a different bend on it. So being an acquirer for a long period of time and no longer kind of in that seat in the MSP space, I thought it might be valuable to share the things that I knew that the MSPs that we were buying should have been doing, but weren't things that I should have said or could have said to them. So what are the like little secrets that an acquisition kind of heavy MSP knows, but doesn't share through kind of the typical channels? So who's buying? So we always broke it down into 3 personas. There's the new owner. So this is the idea that someone's going to come in, buy your business, and that person's going to replace you over a period of time, or maybe a short or long period of time. We don't really see a ton of that in the space anymore. And I think that's because valuations have increased so much that if you're not capturing synergies, it's really hard to find someone that can generate the value that they need for you to be able to exit the business. The only time I really see this is employee kind of buyouts over a period of time. What I call the scaler, which is the organization that's trying to scale up in order to sell to private equity or to be interesting to private equity. And then the money, which are the private equity, whether it's a private equity funded MSP or private equity themselves. So I think, again, I'm going to skip by a lot of this stuff. This is just framing so we can get to the meat of the conversation. So Mark, you want to hit the next one? So this is where I wanted to get into what do they really actually want? So go ahead, Mark. Next slide will show you kind of a lot of the typical things that you hear about in all these conversations. So obviously, EBITDA, the total MER, growth, staffs, what your stack is, and what your client mix are. So I thought it would be interesting to kind of go into these from the side of an acquirer and what I would be looking for if I was buying an MSP at this point. on each of these. And by all means, if anybody has any questions or anything like that, again, super informal presentation, but throw your hand up, ask questions. I'm more than happy to answer. EBITDA. So I think everybody knows that the value of the business is really a multiple of EBITDA. The thing that I found interesting was when you talk to people that are acquiring within the space right now, making sure that you're not pushing EBITDA to a very high degree is something that I don't think a lot of people really understand. So as an acquirer, what I would be looking for would be someone in the 13 to 17 range, because I would know that there's room for me to grow that. The other thing that I think people get caught up on it when you're running a very high EBITDA business, like say you're pushing 35%, 40% in some really rare instances, you're going to get pulled back on normalizations anyways, because the person that's acquiring you is going to know that that's not a sustainable margin to run the business at for a long term, especially after acquisition. So the advice that I have there is trying to maintain a good balance of EBITDA so that you get maximum value for the business, but not focus on it so much that you don't create opportunities to grow. Next one is recurring revenue. So high percentage of recurring revenue. When I was talking to people about selling my business in the first kind of iterations, everybody's like 70% reoccurring. Like that's the golden number. 70, 75% was like, if you're hitting that, you're going to get maximum value for your organization. From the people that I talk to and the deals that I've kind of heard about through the channel, realistically, that's not really true. What I'm hearing, and if you talk to like, or you can listen to things like Ravi did a really great thing on Ninja PSA, that's out in the public. 50% seems to be enough to satisfy the requirement. There might be small upside associated with that that'll drive a slight increase in multiple, but 50%, 60% seems to be the magic number. And what I hear is that most people are not looking at exactly what that revenue mix is right now. So the concept of valuing security-based reoccurring revenue is probably the only kind of lever of that. But whether you're doing essentially Microsoft resale, or if you're doing professional services as reoccurring, or you're doing hardware as a service, they all kind of get lumped into the same pocket. And so I didn't like currently in market, there's not a lot of value in trying to figure out how to diversify that too much. Growth, controlled and steady. One of the things that definitely when you're going to sell business is to understand that slow, steady, controlled growth is of substantially more value than very quick, fast growth. And fast growth will always dictate churn. So a lot of the organizations that I've spoken to that have really tried to put a lot of effort into growing their business in the 12 months prior to selling it saw their churn increase pretty aggressively. So consistent growth over a 3-year period, I think, has much more value than fast growth over a 12-year period. Your staff, obviously good people equals client retention. I think the thing that surprises a lot of people that go through due diligence is the number of people that are interviewed through the organization. So it's not just going to be you as the owner that has to sit with the potential acquirer. It's going to be the primary staff within your business. So making sure that those people are prepared for those conversations, that they're brought in as part of your strategy is something that I didn't see people do really well, and something that I think if you're planning on this, you have the opportunity to really make sure that those people understand why you're looking at these opportunities and have them kind of be in your pocket to help you, rather than it be a surprise. The thing that I would suggest really trying to avoid is you're talking. The person that's going through and doing due diligence on you wants to talk to your staff, and you have to have that conversation with your staff the day before they want to talk. You're months or even a year ahead of that conversation. You're bringing them into that fold. It's going to be a lot easier to prepare them for that essentially interview. Your stack. So I think, again, lots of information out around this. Standards are the best. More simplified it is, the better. When I was running integrations on the MSP side, the last thing that I wanted was someone to have multiple PSAs or RMM tools or any of those things. I wanted to see ConnectWise. I wanted to see LabTech. I wanted to see all the standard off-the-shelf pieces because I knew that my team would know how to integrate those products. So higher value associated with that, then the worst thing you could see would be custom solutions. And client mix, again, pretty standard. Off-the-shelf information here is like, absolutely, you do not want to have a client that's making up more than 10% of your total revenue. Next slide, Mark. So this is where I was hoping to kind of drive the conversation, was really about what I saw from people that were selling their business rather than the actual company. So what were the things, like all of the things that we've talked about up to this point are the things that you need to prepare your company in terms of getting it ready for sale. But what do you need to do for yourself to get yourself ready to sell your business? Mark, if you want to click through, these are the 8 things that I saw on a consistent basis that were lacking. So the ability for someone to educate themselves around the M&A process. And a lot of what I talk about when I talk about the M&A process is actually financial acumen. So understanding how working capital affects your deal, what the concept of an earnout, what dilution means if you're going to go through a merger, how normalizations work and what the typical normalizations are when you go through, when you finish due diligence, when you go through a quality of earnings assessment. So really understanding those things. I know the first time I had conversations about selling my MSP, I'm like sitting there with one screen, just like Googling terms as they're coming out. Trust me, you don't want to be in that position. You want to make sure that you understand these and that you have a really solid grasp on them before entering into the conversation. It's going to be the thing that helps you maximize the value of the deal. Deal structure. I think a lot of people kind of leave this to the company that's acquiring them to determine. And I think that that's a real missed opportunity. There is a lot of bargaining that can be done around adjusting deal structure during a conversation leading up to an LOI. So you can use deal structure to kind of feel out what the parameters are. So by suggesting or changing the concept of what the deal structure may be, you can really get an idea of what the fences are that the company that's buying you is looking to kind of stay within. So just something that I didn't see people do really well. And I think that there's a huge opportunity to flush out kind of what their top line is and what their bottom line is. Understanding the values of synergies. So when you're going through and whoever's looking to acquire your MSP, they're going to be looking at what synergies they can capture through the acquisition. So whether that be staff or whether it be cost associated with a data center or hosting, how much can you save on your RMM or on your, I don't know, your antivirus solution? They're going to know what those dollar values are, and they're going to factor that into the price that they pay for your MSP. So if you work to understand kind of what the cost basis of those are, and if you can start to make those normalizations on your own side to understand how much, if someone larger than you was buying you, how much they would save on those items, you can get a really good idea of what the total value of your business is, not just what it is currently. Making sure that there's an integration plan. So like I'm like as guilty as anyone for this. The first few acquisitions that I did, I had no integration plan. The very first one that I did, I just said, well, we'd buy the company and I'd just continue to run that as a separate entity. Like I had no idea what I was doing. Very quickly, you start to realize that no, you need to make sure that whoever is looking to acquire you has resources to properly integrate your business into theirs. What you're going to be looking for is like obviously an integration plan. If they have a run book or a playbook as it were, and that there's a devoted resource that's going to be working with you through the process. The last thing you want to do is be running through the organization that just acquired you while you're trying to manage your staff and trying to figure out who you should be talking to for everything. So having a central point that is going to be your contact post-deal that usually isn't the person that you're going to be dealing with as you go through the close is really critical. Understanding your exit options. So I think when you go through in an acquisition, Like you've been working your entire life to kind of build up this business. In most cases, this is your retirement that you're looking at. You get really kind of excited about the value that you're going to be able to pull from the organization. And you start to overlook things like, okay, if I transfer equity into this business, how am I going to get it out? What does it look like if I leave the business? How does that all work? What are the mechanics associated with that? I'll tell you right now, you're probably running your own business for a reason. And the transition to an employee for a lot of people is very difficult. And so understanding what that looks like and how, if you decide that it's not a right fit for you, how you can leave gracefully from an organization is going to be critical. Getting clarity on your new role if you're continuing in the business. Another thing where it's like, we could just figure that out later. We're all really good guys, no big deal. You have a ton of value, all of those things, all red flags. You want to make sure that you understand exactly what your contribution needs to be in the organization that you're moving to, and that there's clear kind of KPIs and guidelines for that, so that you don't end up in those conversations 2 months or 3 months or 4 months into a deal that you're trying to work through. Especially important if you have an earnout. So what is the scope of my current job? What you don't want to see yourself ending up in a position of is, okay, well, I've got this earnout that I need to protect, but now I'm also being pulled into a whole different scope of work that I wasn't expecting. So making sure that you have something documented. So if that happens, which it's very likely that it may need to, if you're bringing a lot of value to the organization that acquires you, that there's something for you to reference to say, when we decided on my earnout, this was the scope that we decided that I would be doing. Now that that scope has changed, there may need to be an adjustment to the earnout that calculation that we've determined. I had a good accountant and I deleted that and put great accountant. One of the things that I think is very undervalued in preparing for a transaction is a relationship with an accountant. And a really great accountant, ideally an accountant that has experience going through due diligence, that the cost associated with that will absolutely be recovered through a transaction. And so if you're not comfortable with your accountant right now, I would highly recommend looking for someone that's going to bring a lot more value to the business. Like, I was lucky enough when I was coming through that my business partner was an accountant that had public practice and had been through IPO, and keeping the business very, very clean meant that when we went through our sale, it flew through. It was really easy. All of the conversations that they ended up in with either private equity or the acquirer's financial team, it was really nice to have someone that could navigate those conversations and someone that I could kind of play good cop, bad cop with, so that I could act like it was a really important component to negotiating a deal. So get someone that you're comfortable introducing and having a part of the acquisition conversation. And then the last thing is not be afraid to walk away. Ultimately, if you're not comfortable with anything, if you start seeing red flags, like, this is really like you're dating at this point. And if you're starting to see those red flags, the reality is when you get married, they're gonna those red flags are gonna become a lot larger. So make sure that you're walking into something that you feel comfortable with. A deal will always exist. If I can kind of confirm one thing, is that there's always someone that's out there looking to buy a good MSP, especially in the US. Obviously in Canada, where I had ran my business, it was a little bit more difficult to find like an acquirer that would be looking for $5, $7, $8 million MSP. But down in the US, you guys have a lot of options when it goes to selling your MSP. So don't be afraid to walk away. Go through the process with a few people. Maybe even if you're not ready. I know, again, MSP Corp, the conversations that have been publicly shared there, that those guys are always ready to have conversations with people, even if they're 5 years out. but the amount that you can learn through going through initial conversations, even if you don't get to LOI, is invaluable. So those are my 8 tips. If I could go back and do it again, the things that I learned over the last 15 years of doing mergers and acquisitions in the MSP space. So Mark, that's the content that I've prepared. I'm happy to answer any questions that you guys may have, or curious to know if anybody's going through this process right now or has been through this process and found found the same thing that I found when I launched into it.
I have a question for you, Ryan. Let me go back to that piece. I have to exit full screen because I don't know how to work slides. I'm sorry. So on that whole deal structure is your best bargaining chip. As far as the question was, like, have you ever tried to one up the person trying to buy you, trying to one up their deal versus what they offered? Is that something that
yeah, I
you
think
see
there's a lot of, like, there's going to be a lot of negotiation through that process, Mark. I think the interesting thing about like deal structure is that, okay, well, if it was an all cash deal, what does that look like? Okay, great. Well, if it's 50% equity, 50% cash, what does that look like? And you can start to, if you start playing, there's a bunch of other things. Well, how much is earnout? How much is coming out of the earnout? But the idea is that if you switch the levers around enough and you feel kind of where there's room and where there isn't room, you can really feel where the top value that someone's willing to pay for the business is, versus if you're just going in and saying, yeah, I'm just looking for an all cash deal. Well, then everybody's going to come back to you with a lower offer.
Mhm.
If you go and say, well, I don't know, you talk to me about deal structure, I'm flexible on deal structure, then you're going to be able to kind of really truly understand the value that they're willing to pay. Just don't clean yourself into a corner from the very beginning.
And have you walked away from red flags?
I've walked away from deals because when I was selling my MSP, I went through probably 4 or 5 conversations. We've got to probably LOI multiple times, and we walked away quite a few times. And the biggest thing for me was, through that process, I learned what people were looking for when they were buying. And then it gave me time to go back into my MSP and fix those things or make adjustments. Making sure that I had signed contracts was a good one. Like all of the basic stuff when you're kind of the first round of going through that, you could see where you could increase your value. So Tim, myself, when we started conversations, we'd go back, what we learned, we put up on our whiteboard in our office, and they would become essentially a task list to creating value in our MSP.
Did anybody have a question? Nope. Walter? Nope. Have you, Ryan, have you ever had the like a seller's remorse? Like you sold your MSP and they didn't do right by you or something like that. Have you ever seen that, or have you?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen it for sure. Like, did I feel it? Absolutely not.
Okay.
I think the thing to remember is that when you go to sell the business is, and 2 years later or a year later, you kind of always look at your own business through rose-colored glasses and think, oh, well, I could have just done this, or I could have just done that, or whatever. But the reality is that no, like it's hard to kind of not get those ideas, because especially as you start to learn through the business that has acquired you about the way that they do things, it's easy to think, oh yeah, I could have done that. But the reality is that I didn't. And when I did a deal, I was really happy with the outcome of that deal. And so, yeah, the buyer's remorse, I think if I kind of talk about people that I've seen go through it or the feelings of it, I think everybody eventually kind of gets past it, but I think it's a natural, it's a natural feeling as you go through. Like I don't think being sold. Like really, what, like whoever's buying you is selling, right? And so they're going to say things, and they're going to there's going to be expectations that are set that aren't going to necessarily be there when you get there, but it's all part of the game, right? So realization of that is important.
I'm just making sure that you're not having buyer's remorse of me here with Lifecycle Insights, because I was part of that. I'm just making sure. Matt did have a question on chat, and I don't want to mess up the EBITDA to the initials.
So this is an interesting one. So multipliers of EBITDA, there's lots of information out there about this. What I've seen is that, especially in the last 9 months, as interest rates have increased, the multipliers are starting to kind of adjust a little bit. Definitely, if you were coming out of COVID hot, you would have been you could push 8, like for an average business in some cases, if there's just so much heat around it. I think the reality is like 6, 7. We're kind of settling into those pre-COVID numbers is the feedback that I'm getting from people right now. Again, those are businesses that are kind of meeting the general criteria. If you're getting and are over, say, $1 million in EBITDA, if you are looking, if you're larger than that, if you're running kind of in the 10 plus 10, 15 million in revenue, then obviously as the business grows, the buyer becomes a lot more mature and EBITDA or multiples of EBITDA can increase. If you're small, like say you're doing maybe sub 1 million in revenue, you're probably going to be at a lower EBITDA just simply because the risk associated with buying, or multiple of EBITDA rather, the risk associated with buying your business is higher. But 6, 7, 8, kind of depending on the maturity of the business, I think are reasonable numbers that are coming out right now. I'd love to know, like, you guys probably hear it more than I have in the last 9 months. I haven't been kind of selling an MSP in the last 9, so I'd love to know what you're hearing and where multiples sit right now. But I would assume that based off of kind of the increase in interest rates and a little bit of a slowdown in the economy, that those multiples have taken a little bit of a hit in the last couple of months.
Cool. Hope that answers your question, Matt.
Is that what you're looking for, Matt? Is that like, I'd love to know if that's what you're hearing, or if you were just if you haven't heard in a while.
Yeah, no, I haven't heard in a while, and that's curious. I mean, I wasn't even sure if it was EBITDA that people were going off of still, but that's, that's what I would hear.
The reality is if you're borrowing money, the banks and private equity, those guys are like, they need to go off the multiple of EBITDA, is everything that I've seen. What's interesting now is about switching to M&A in the software space. Like, that is a totally different game. And it's all based off of like multiples of recurring revenue. But I didn't see many like multiple of recurring revenue deals go through in the 10 years that I was doing it. It would always be like someone would say that it was a multiple of recurring revenue, but the deal would actually be structured off a multiple of EBITDA. So like 2 times recurring revenue was a common thing that got thrown out, but it always usually equated to like a 7x EBITDA.
Sure.
Awesome.
Brian, do you have any advice for how to recognize that I should be acquiring another MSP?
Yeah. So Greg, when I started going down that path, the thing that really drove me was there's certain, like, we called them valleys of death. I think that term's pretty commonly known, right? There's certain things that it's really, really hard to grow past. And the advice that I got early on was that when you hit one of those, what feels to be a wall, go do an acquisition and it'll force you to get through it really, really quickly. And it was absolutely the case. Like, so we did 3 acquisitions within 3 years when we, like, so first one, a year later in level 4. And the company essentially tripled within that 3-year period. Some of that, like a lot of that was through the fact that we brought on acquisition, but a lot of it was just through organic growth, and the maturity of the business had to increase to support the scale. So like when I was running, say, $1 million, we bought another organization that was half our size, and that was like the first entry point for me. And it was like scary as all hell. And But it pushed us to 2 million like within a year. And then same thing when we got to around 2.5 million, we bought another $2.5 million business, and we were at 5 like instantly. And going from 5 to 7 was a much easier path than going from 2 to 7. And so I think it just really helped accelerate the growth. The fear of the debt made you like really concentrate on running the business well. Would be like, would be my advice. The other thing is that there's no faster way to create value for yourself than to buy at a lower multiple and then sell for a higher multiple. So if you have the opportunity to buy less mature MSPs that like you could, maybe some of them you pick up for 4, and then within a short period of time, you can sell that exact same revenue for a 6 or 7. It's a really good way to kind of level up. And that's what a lot of the growth that you're seeing funded by private equity is what they're trying to do. If they can get past that 50 million revenue size, then they're in a totally different class of multiple. And like, so they're not necessarily trying to gain value by just growing the business in the same way and selling it for the same multiple. They're trying to hit like what Kirk's saying here about like when the goalposts associated with size and how those affect like definitely like Kirk, 1 is the first one to even kind of gain a lot of like interest. And then definitely I think 2.5 and 5 were the numbers that I saw that you would kind of add an additional turn. So for each one of those goalposts, I would suggest that you're probably going to add an extra multiple associated with those.
Total revenue or specifically recurring?
Like, as long as you're over 50% recurring revenue, you're good. Like the reality of it is that there are very few businesses out there that are running 70% recurring revenue, despite what you might hear at events that you go to and the bar conversations that you have. When you start to actually go through and evaluate what people consider recurring revenue, you start to find out pretty quickly that it's closer to 50%, 60%. And so like another good point, Greg, is like figure out exactly what other people consider reoccurring revenue so that you can be really clear on what that looks like within your business so that you're not setting unreal expectations. Like block time, like the number of times that I had conversations that block time is not reoccurring revenue, despite the fact that someone buys another block of time. Like those types of things, just making sure that you're setting the foundation for what that is. But yeah, 50% of true recurring revenue is good. Yeah, like the point that you're covering your costs by is an extremely good place. The thing that I would also caution is to not limit your growth though on trying to maintain a really high level of recurring revenue. It's going to be really hard to grow at like 17, 18% year over year if you're trying to maintain a 80% recurring revenue, unless you're extremely mature. Like there are businesses that do it and there are people that are successful with it, but you can drive a lot more EBITDA quickly by doing project-based work, by selling hardware, by doing some of those high value things just to get your EBITDA up over that trailing 12-month period. So I'd be cautious about limiting yourself just to recurring revenue. I know that's probably not the advice that you normally hear, but when it comes to actually creating value within the business, it's recurring revenue doesn't make sense over a certain percentage point. If you're trying to build a long-term business that you're going to hand off to your kids, and then hell yeah, like 100% recurring revenue is the way to go. But if you have a timeline to sell the business, growth recurring revenue percentage balance is much more important.
Cool.
Kirk,
any other questions
around, or like have you been kind of down this road, or have you, like, obviously from your questions, like you've got some experience here. Is there anything that we're covering that you think outside of what you heard?
No, I mean, I'm not engaging in this for probably a good 10 years, but I always feel like it's a good pathway because as you kind of align and grow the business, what's good to have on books, as you approach that time, and then is it, selling to a business? Is it turning over to employees and then figuring out what is a good exit path for that? And so, talking to other VCs, some who are MSP focused, some are just, we want to acquire a business in technology type thing. I've heard various multipliers for various revenues. I try to follow kind of the, I came from following True Methods for a while back in the day. And, they're always saying that you want to try and reach, having your MRR be the big thing. And that seems to be kind of the common thing, is that someone doesn't want to acquire your business and just dealing with break fix, that having that ongoing revenue, that if things were to shift, that would still generate, even if the project's dried up, and that your NRR should be about 20%. If you can hit that 20% goal monthly of what your total revenue is, and the rest being this recurring engine, is kind of like that's what will put you into that gold star class.
Is there conversations that are currently happening about contract term too? Like, do those get brought in? Like, one of the things that I heard when I was like originally going to sell my business is like, well, if you have 3-year contract terms, like then we're going to add an additional multiple. I never actually saw that be the case. Like, as long as you had signed contracts with all of your customers, that seemed to be good enough to satisfy that requirement. But curious to know what other conversations are happening out there.
I've heard it a couple of times. I don't like locking in businesses because they can always get out of a long-term contract. I mean, if it comes down to it, you get the lawyers involved. There's ways of getting out of it. So I like having open-ended contracts in a way with the businesses I work with. It seems to build better trust. And luckily, the only times I've lost businesses in the last few years is because of their own M&A, that they get acquired, that they retire. So, we're good there. And I think it builds that kind of relationship. And I think the other part, like you said, is keeping your employees and keeping that consistency. I've been lucky enough that since 2012, I have not had an employee leave to go to another company. I've let employees go, but building that culture, I think, is huge, because if you're selling the business or you're turning it over to somebody else, that you have that consistency of the employees there to help convert the businesses over to whoever it is, and have those familiar faces is, I think, very helpful.
Yeah, it's one of the points that we kind of always assess is you go on Glassdoor and start reading reviews. Like all of the public facing information was really kind of helpful as you went through, and it would definitely dictate price because you would be looking at that as a risk factor. So the better kind of a company represented externally, the more comfortable you felt that the employees would be kind of willing to go along that ride with you, versus if there was a lot of negative reviews and their employee churn numbers were extremely high.
Right. So,
cool.
Yeah, I appreciate the topic and just kind of getting some other ideas. Again, not wanting to sell anytime soon, but it's always good to have that conversation. If things change and had it go sooner.
Well, that's, you never know what's going to happen. I know when we were building, I had no intent. I'd actually, to be completely frank, I didn't even know that there was value in the business. So I was dumb kid out of school, but like ended up buying an MSP and started running the thing. And a couple years into it, it's like, well, you start getting calls from all of the brokers, and it's like, oh my gosh, like there's actually, this was early in when MSP M&A started up, and it's like, there's actually value in this business. And so from that point on, we tried to run the business that if it needed to be sold at any period, that it was ready to go was the goal. Whatever that meant at that time to us changed quite a bit over the years, but it was always in the back of our heads.
Ryan, do you see major trends like lots of collapse in the market, consolidation?
Yeah, well, I mean, so I don't know if MSP consolidation is actually good for the consumer. Like a lot of, I think everybody can see that. Like the reality is that the relationship that a client wants to have is with a business owner. Like there's no better relationship that I had with my clients than when I was managing that relationship. Obviously, it's not scalable. It's not something that I could do for the rest of my life. And there were other reasons that I didn't want to run my business that way. But as you get further and further away from the client, and I think this is really what like brought LCI into ScalePad and where the value associated with that is that, like, I think we all know the first account manager that you hire or that you try and bring into the business is like the hardest one to get right. And there's no good way to kind of measure the conversation. And so like tool like LCI, obviously was attracted to that. But I think a lot of the larger MSPs, like they just don't have the ability to compete with the consultative nature of that type of relationship. And so I think that realistically, Greg, when you're talking about trending, I think that larger MSPs will probably move into a space where they're providing more standardized services. And it's going to leave a gap in the market for actual like business consultative services. So I think the next round, like the V3 MSP or whatever it is, and especially with the consolidation to cloud services, like this idea that I'm not just looking at your technology, but I'm looking at your business processes. I'm looking at your actual, like your application stack, and I'm making consultative decisions around that will really be this layer that's going to have to come in somewhere, because the larger MSPs are not going to be able to deliver it. And the only people that are delivering it right now are the Deloittes and the large players. So you start to see this pressure from the accounting firms seeing that gap, but not really being situated to be able to fill it effectively, especially in the small to medium space. Like enterprise, they've already got that taken care of. But that small to medium business efficiency will be kind of where the next level of MSP probably comes in. The other thing that I'm really seeing in terms of trends is security services, the valuations associated with security services. So when you talk about multiples, that's the one avenue of recurring revenue that's going to get valued at a different level. What we were starting to see was a lot of people starting to break their P&Ls out into like specifically the recurring revenue associated with security services, because they were asking for a different multiple on that line than on their standard recurring revenue. The other trend that I think is probably going to come in, and the thing that like always scared me about the business, was Microsoft resell falling into the MRR bucket. I think it's one of those interesting kind of things that I'm surprised that it hadn't been picked up yet, but super low margin of product resell masquerading as MRR. I don't know how much longer you're going to continue to get a real value on that business. And there's going to be, especially from the VC side, there's going to be some realization that not all MRR is equal.
You said security evaluations were different. Were you saying it was higher or lower?
Way higher. Like if all of your recurring revenue came from security-based services, like you're 10x easy. Like there's just so much more long-term value in that. And I think private equity, all these VCs see that as a much more sustainable kind of model for the MSP. It's much stickier, and it's actually a lot lower touch than things like help desk services and all of those, right? So it scales a lot easier than the heavy labor associated with a lot of the other lines of recurring revenue. And there's starting to be a realization around that. And so that's why I think the realization about product resale masquerading as MRR is going to come in as well.
Would you put that same filter on the security MRR being our labor versus MRR being?
Yeah. I don't think so, not yet. Okay. But eventually, Greg, I think that like as the industry continues to mature, then yeah, security product resale will fall into that same bucket. But I think specifically it's Microsoft right now, just simply because of the volume of recurring revenue that it represents in most MSPs. It's the easiest one to peel off. And there's a single invoice associated with it that's really easy to audit versus kind of all of the stuff that makes up your security suite. So.
What about on the small side? Are you seeing that This is maybe not less M&A of a question, but my concern has been it's going to be more difficult to be a smaller MSP because of so much overhead that you have to have in different specialties.
Well, it's the commoditization of the entire space, right?
Right.
The reality is that like as a large MSP that's doing 50, 60 million in revenue, your negotiating power with the SaaS vendors is just completely different. I know kind of like what I've heard from friends in the industry and is like components like all of your RMM tools and all of those things that are high cost items. Like you guys know, as you scale up, the discounts become greater and greater associated with that. So to deliver $1 per seat price is just, there's way more margin and a larger organization to be able to satisfy that. So this is where, like, again, the valuation of security services and all of that start to creep in, because knowing that all of those items can be commoditized fairly easily in a large MSP, then it's the specialized services that become much more important. But I mean, the industry as a whole is so immature. Like, I mean, like realistically, what have we been doing? We've only been doing this for like 10 years. Like, so it's not unrealistic to think that there's going to be specialization that will happen within the space, especially within the next like 10 years. Security services will probably even be broken into, like, compliance will be one, security will be another. Like there's so much space for specialization. How that all rolls up into something that an end consumer can actually consume is when I'm having beers with the guys that we all have a really hard time understanding how that comes together. Is like there's still a central point for the relationship. And maybe that central point, it goes back to more of a consultancy based, and maybe there's some sort of reoccurring revenue that then becomes associated with that. So like you start to see the delivery of this VCIO service and things that obviously that LCI is talking about. I don't know, like I don't see a bunch of people doing that really, really, really well. But when someone starts to do that really, really, really well, asking for that to be, and whatever supporting services associated with it, to become a reoccurring revenue, source of reoccurring revenue will be there. And then whoever's providing that service may just be buying all of these other services like help desk and our PSA, sorry, RMM and all of that from a provider that specifically provides that. We're starting to see a little bit of that in Canada. There's like outsourced help desk companies that are providing a lot of those tools, and the margins associated with them are too thin for people to kind of build a business off of them. Mm-hmm. But it's a weird gray area right now because the people providing those services aren't really good in a lot of cases, and they don't manage your customer like it's their own. But this is all a matter of us removing, like as MSPs, starting to remove variables from what we support longer term. And then as we do that, those services will become a lot easier to provide a reasonable level of service.
Yeah, it gets back to your point of you have to have that relationship and intimate knowledge for some of that stuff. And the further you silo things, the less you have. And that's the difficulty of scaling.
It is. And especially scaling across such a broad group, like now we've got security services, now we've got compliance, now we've got like the scope of what like a typical MSP is supporting for a business has become so broad, and the percentage of like wallet share hasn't increased in order to satisfy that requirement. So there's some sort of weird tipping point that we're going to run into, that like a client needs to, or a partner, a client needs to understand that you can't continue to pay $100 a seat and continue to increase the scope associated with that to that degree. Mm-hmm. Either you lose some of the variability in what you're asking for, or but again, just a level of maturity that just doesn't exist in the MSP community to that degree yet.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, thank you for satisfying my my desire to have MSP conversations. I've been out of it now for 9 months and being in the SaaS space and doing M&A over here. And it's yeah, after 21 years of running one of those businesses, you start to miss miss a lot of this conversation. I got to get to some events or something pretty soon.
He's a recovering MSP, guys. he's recovering, and whatnot. We're almost up in time. We're almost top of the hour, guys. Ryan, do you mind, sharing your LinkedIn so that people can reach out to you or something like that
absolutely.
on the chat? Or just say it out loud. Wait, it's Ryan Sigouin, and this is how you spell it. But people in chat knows. They can see.
Right on my window. Yeah.
That doesn't work when you're in actual events, seeing people face to face. There's no name on the bottom left of their.
It's been 3 or 4 years for me, Mark. So. But yeah, by all means, especially in partners of ScalePad, by all means, please reach out to me if you guys have any questions about it. I love talking about this stuff. It's nice to kind of be on the other side and be able to kind of share it and help people that were in the same situation I was. It's really intimidating, and you're dealing with a lot of really smart people that went to some really fancy schools, and it's nice to be able to play toe to toe with them a little bit.
Cool. All right, guys. Have a great rest of your day. Have a great weekend. For you Canadian folks, happy Civics Day on Monday. Enjoy your long weekend. For us American folks, Monday is Monday. We'll see you guys there. And if you guys have any questions, concerns, emotional outbursts, please feel free to reach out to everybody here. You guys should already know me. I'm Mark, Lifecycle. Hey, have a great, wonderful day and whatnot.
Hey.
You guys.
Thanks, you, Mark. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Ryan. Have a great weekend.
You too.
Yeah, Alexander. See you guys.